Paul here. Just been working on a client project where I've done some neat things with managed metadata. So I thought I'd record a video about what I've done. It's kind of like using some interesting user experience patterns in Power Apps to leverage managed metadata. If you're wondering why I called it More Team Cuddles, then you'll just have to watch the video to find out. All right, here we go.
Okay, so what we're going to do first is I thought I'd show you the default experience you get with Managed Metadata support for Power Apps. So quickly, let's have a look at a SharePoint list I've created. So on SharePoint, I've got a list called Idea Register, and this is where we're going to store information about our ideas. And this is kind of like project ideas. So we're asking for the idea itself, who it applies to. Could be a project manager, could be corporate comms or someone like that. And the phase of the project, is it the start of the project, is it the closeout, is it the risk management bit, and sort of the detail of the idea and the type of idea it is. So that's all being stored in SharePoint. I will draw attention to two things: audience and project phase are managed metadata columns. And in fact, I can show you that just by going into SharePoint. Audience, if you have a look, is a set of terms with a bunch of roles. And it's a multi-select managed metadata column. So for example, I can select these three as my audience, right? And project phase, similarly, it's just some basic, I've just thrown in some ideas for just elements of project lifecycle. So it could be the contract management, scoping, and stakeholder engagement. And we might have an idea, some improvement idea related to that. That's the basic gist of this app. So if we look in Power Apps, this is the typical experience you get if you follow the wizards. I have connected to that data source. So if you go to View Data Sources, you can see I'm connected to SharePoint to that idea register. I've then dropped a edit form onto the page, and I've linked it to that data source. So let's go and quickly do that. Data source, so you can see there's the data source. You can see the columns I've chosen: idea, audience, project phase, and idea detail. Learning type, I have made a slight modification to it just to turn it into a drop-down list. But here's the basic experience when you use the native thing. So we come in here and we go, here's a learning type. This is something we need to embrace, more cuddles among project team. Who's the audience for this? And this is the managed metadata support in Power Apps. If I can either click the combo box and select one or more roles, like so, or I can also do a find. And you can see there's executive management. Now this works fine, and I think it's okay, but have a look at this. Now that I've chosen 3 and the screen real estate, now we've gone over the width of this. When you come out, you no longer can see who you've selected. It just says 3 items. And so one of the side effects that's limited by screen real estate, because this is a mobile phone scoped application, is it can get a little bit limiting. And also, did you notice that the position of the selector actually moved based on what I chose? In any event, and there's my idea: more cuddles, one project team. The detail is at stand up each morning, 1 minute, cuddle time, and we can go and submit that. Now, let me show you an alternate version of this that I've done that shows you what you can do with native Power Apps controls. Okay, so now let's have a look at an alternate one that I've done. To be fair, I have changed the default color scheme. And this is actually a scaled down version of something I'm doing for a client. So I apologize that I've actually hidden a lot of stuff here. So that initialize button, you would normally not see that. I'll explain that in a moment. But basically, so the same kind of thing. You come in, you choose whether you want to avoid, embrace, or improve. So let's say this time we do improve, and the learning detail is much more Power Apps awesomeness. And check out how I do the tagging. And you've got to remember that this is a small device, like a mobile phone. It's the small form factor. So now when you press who would be interested in this and you click tag, up pops a dialog that allows you to then tag the particular groups involved. So we've picked 4. I click done, and you can see that they're listed underneath here. So too with the project phase. So we go, this is definitely in contract management, in cost control, design, procurement, and risk management. And at this point, I can click Save, and happy places. If we go and have a look in SharePoint and refresh my page, you will see the data in there, full managed metadata. So you can see there's my learning type, here's my audience. Again, multi-value managed metadata support. I love that. And I think though that that's a much kind of more friendly experience, and I like this idea of bringing up the tag selector. So what magic allowed me to do this? First up, everything you see on this page, it is not a data form. I am individually dropping these controls on the page, right? So I have full control over how this thing looks and feels. That's number one. So the implication of that for those of you that have done a bit more advanced Power Apps is I'm not using a submit form function to submit this data. I'm actually using a function called patch. But basically, patch allows you to do much more sophisticated data update scenarios. So let's just take a little bit of a look at a couple of the tricks here. First up, these are just standard label controls. These ones, if you have a look, they are straight up data labels. And if you look in the text, there's nothing fancy there. I have simply one called avoid, one called embrace, one called improve. So what's the deal with these colors? How is that happening? Well, what happens is every time, if we go and have a look at the onSelect property, every time we click one of these buttons, we are updating a variable called learning type, and that variable is being set to avoid. Now, advanced Power users who are wondering why I didn't use the set function, there is a perfectly good reason for that, because there were other screens that were involved in this. I'm not going to go into that now. Rest assured, there is a perfectly good reason why I'm using update context and not the set function. But if we go and have a look at embrace and improve, right, same kind of deal. That one is using embrace, and we're using improved on the onSelect. So no worries. Every time you click one of these, it updates a variable called learning type. So then how's the color happening? Well, if we go and have a look at the fill property on each of these labels, the fill property is saying, well, if that learning type variable is avoid, use one color, otherwise use a different color. And so similarly, if we go and have a look at this label and have a look at the fill, if the learning type of this one is embrace, do the color change. So the net effect of this is, if you click on this one, it sets the variable to avoid, which also influences the color. And very simple scenario, that's how the color stuff is done. So I guess the more interesting scenario is, how was this tag thing done? That's kind of interesting, isn't it? How did I manage to create this interface that popped up managed metadata term sets? First part of the answer is why I have this initialize button. Now this button here is actually usually something that runs on the start of the application when it starts up. But if we have a look, let's see if we can break this down a bit. We are actually using a new function that's come out, and at the time I'm recording this, there is no documentation for this yet. The function is called choices, and it's a really useful function, because what choices does is you basically pass it as a parameter your data source and a particular column. Now, if that column is a managed metadata column or a lookup column, choices will bring back all of the possible values available to that column. What does that mean in English? Well, if you look at it from a SharePoint point of view, and we, for example, have a look at audience, choices function brings me back all of these potential values, okay? Now, how have I used that? You can see there's a few things I'm doing here. So I'm using a function called choices to bring me back a list of managed metadata terms for the audience column. But then I'm adding an extra column to it. I'm adding an extra column called selected, and that column has a default value of false. And all of that is being put into a collection, which is a fancy kind of variable, but it's a collection called audience tags. And if we go and have a look, here is the effect of that. File, collections, because you can see this stuff, and we have a look at audience tags. And here they are, corporate comms, executive management. By the way, this is the first 5 items in the collection. It's not all of them, but you can see number 1, the extra column that I added. And these are all the managed metadata pieces of information. So the choices function is really handy because it gives you not only the term, it also gives you its parent term as well as its GUIDs and values and various other bits and pieces. This is all really useful stuff for those of you SharePoint people that are familiar with managed metadata. Now at the moment, the selected is set to false, which makes sense because that was what I put as the default value for this new column. So I've done the same thing with project phase. I've just called it work breakdown structure there, WBS tags, but it works in the same way. So the next question then is, how did I produce this screen? What is this all about? So this is actually quite a tricky screen. It uses a whole bunch of concepts, so this might take me a little bit to explain. And it depends somewhat on your background in PowerApps. So for those of you that are PowerApps experts, I'll tell you straight up, this is a canvas using 3 data cards with a gallery inside. Now let me break that down and actually explain that a little better. You can see actually here, while I've got the screen visible, that we're on the same screen. We have not left the screen at all. And in fact, you can see that we've overlaid the previous screen and put a pop-up here with a whole bunch of the tags and sort of grayed out everything else. The magic that allowed me to do that is this beast called a canvas, right? So what is a canvas and where does it come from? Well, first up, you will actually not see a canvas in the menu. It's not under controls, it's not under gallery. So where is this canvas? Well, it's kind of hidden away a little bit tricky, and the way I do it is this way. Might be a bit naughty, but who knows. If you come into the new screen section and you add a scrollable screen, let's add one. If you actually have a look at this screen that we've just added, the screen itself has a canvas. So a canvas is basically a container for other things, other controls, other data cards, and it allows it to scroll. That's actually the powerful thing about a canvas. Now a canvas can be divided up into sections called data cards. And so I can add additional sections into here. And you can see there's now a second data card here. And I can keep adding more sections, which will make sense in a second. Because, and you can see the scroll bar there, I just clicked the wrong thing, but I guess it proves the point that canvases is designed for to store other controls. So if I, for example, grab a drop down, we've just put it on this one. Let's add a date picker here. Let's put it underneath. If I come to the next data card, I can add, say, a list box. Okay, and if you have a look, each data card, you can see it here in the control selector down here, that these 2 controls exist on this data card. So each data card, if you have a look at it, so the overall canvas can move, but the data cards can also be resized, right? And so you've got quite a bit of flexibility here, and that's what I did with that one. So you've got quite a bit of flexibility here as to how you lay things out. Now, how did I manage to get this magic called a canvas onto a normal screen? Because I didn't start out by making one. Here's how I do it. I make a scrollable screen, and I literally grab the canvas, I copy it to the clipboard, and then I go to my actual screen and I paste it. And so that was how this canvas started life. As you can see, if you look closely, here are some data cards. And if I click on each data card, you can see where it lives, okay? And there are 3 data cards, and the main data card that actually holds our tags is the middle one. These ones actually don't have any controls in, the outer ones. And all they do though, if you have a look at the fill property of this data card, you can see that I've put a color in there, but I've also put it 0.5, and that's controlling the degree of opacity. So if I was to change that to a 0.1, you can see that that's gone virtually white. And if I do say a 0.8, it's getting close to a gray color. So that's how I gave the kind of effect of an overlay. Okay, we've just basically taking a canvas, marking it as visible. You can see that the visible is based on a function. I'll come back to that in a second. And so all we're doing is hiding and showing this canvas on certain conditions. So now let's talk about those conditions. If I press play again and I go out, make the canvas go away. if we have a look at this tag button, have a look at this. One of the things I have is a variable called show tag canvas, and I'm setting show tag canvas to true. And so when I click this control here, that variable gets set to true. Now if we have a look at our canvas and we have a look at the visible property of this canvas, you can see that I am simply using that variable as my show or not show. Hence, when I click this tag button, it comes up, and when I click this X here, guess what it's doing? Pretty easy. If we have a look at this control, I'm setting show tag canvas to false, which has the immediate effect of hiding it again. So that's quite a nice effect. So the next question is, okay, that's great. How do you get the tags from Managed Metadata come up? And furthermore, how is it, if you've only got one canvas, how is it that it displays one set of tags here and then displays a completely different set of tags, even though it's the same canvas and the same gallery here? Well, let's get into that next. So firstly, if I bring it up again, let's just have a look at this inner data card, because I've got a few things going on in here. So the main thing, apart from a kind of a heading and a done button and the close, is I have a gallery. So let me select it this way. So here is our gallery. Now, this gallery is based on, or where's its data source? This gallery has a data source, but the data source is something called tag list. Now, I haven't even talked about tag list, but this probably at this point you think, what? I don't get this, because when I explained earlier, if I close this, if we go and have a look at my initialize button quickly, if you recall, actually, I have a collection called audience tags, and I have a collection called work breakdown structure tags. So what's going on with that? Well, here is the trick. On this button that I click, I'm actually using the clear collect command, and I'm basically saying, take the audience tag and copy it, make a copy of it into a collection called tag list. And when I click this one down here, I'm copying the work breakdown structure tags into a collection called tag list. Now the beauty of this is that when I now click, say this one, you are now using, this gallery, its data source is that tag list collection, which happens to be a complete copy of the project phase content. And then when I come to this one, if I can get the click going while I'm in design mode, now it's the audience content. Really neat trick. One gallery displaying different data sources because we're using collections to do the job. Now this starts to explain maybe where my selected comes in, I hope, because here's the other trick. When you come in here and you actually go, yep, I want corporate comms, IT support, process control, and safety manager. How is it that I'm actually tracking which ones are selected? Well, if you recall, if we go back and have a look at our collections, and we'll just use audience tags that we examined earlier, if you recall, there is a column called selected, currently false. You've now learned that every time you click to bring up the tag selector, it's copying the contents into a variable called tag list. So if we have a look at tag list now, you can now see that some of these have gone and been set to true. So what's happening here is every time you click one of these, it's setting the selected from false to true, and vice versa. Let's have a look at the code that does that. So we go to our gallery, and the gallery has a button on it. And if you have a look at the onSelect, we're using a function called update if. And what we're saying is this. Update if, by the way, allows you to just update certain parts of a conditional update. So we're basically saying, okay, update this tag list. We're going to update it if the term GUID equals this item.term GUID. And I'll explain that in a second. That's the condition to update things. And then when we find the match that we're looking for, we change the selected column to be the opposite of what it is now. So true becomes false and false becomes true. So let's just put aside this condition thing for a second, and let's also have a look at the fill property, because the fill property is all about the color. And if we have a look at this, this says if this item dot selected, in other words, if the selected column is true, change the color. If it's not true, have a different color. And so hence, every time I click this, I'm toggling selected on and off, and the fill property is responding by adjusting the color. So users can have a quick, easy visual to see that they've selected appropriate tags. Now, at this point, we're missing something though. What about actually, if you go back and have a look in our collection, our tag list has got all our values, true, true, true for these ones. Audience tags is still false, 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 false. And this is the one that actually stores the information. That tag list is kind of like a temporary placeholder. So if you come back in and have a look at our done button, guess what it's doing? It says, it's actually a little bit kludgy at the moment, but it says, okay, if we are dealing with the audience collection, then what we do is we write the contents of tag list back to the audience tags selection. If it's not an audience one, we know that it's project phase. So we'll copy the contents of tag list back to WBS tags. And then we turn off the canvas so you don't see it anymore. So here's the effect. If I click done, suddenly you're seeing some selected tags down here. If we go and have a look in the collection again, you will now see audience tags is storing true, true, true. So you can see that we now have our tags. And all I'm doing with this down here to show those tags is this is just a straight up label, and I'm grabbing all of the audience tags where the selected equals true. And all I'm doing here is I'm actually filtering that collection by that. So I'm only bring me the selected ones. And what the concat function does is then just puts a comma. I'm comma delimiting it basically. There's a little bit more to that which I won't explain, but that's basically the idea. And so that's how, if you think about what happens now, as soon as I click this, it copies the contents of audience tags into tag list. Now we're dealing with the tag list. If I add some more, we've just updated tag list. Now I click done, it writes it back to audience tags, which you can now see here. And so that's how you can just quickly tag and untag things, and it works really nice. You might have also noticed that actually the controls auto adjust based on how much data you put in. So keep an eye on where this would fit and the distance between this and the information above. If I do a full tag of everything, not only does it move down, unlike the native support, you can see all of your tags. So this is a much more sort of screen real estate friendly way of doing it. And same thing with now that I've copied the project work breakdown structure into tag list, you can see the same thing happening. So that's basically the gist of how it was done. We're using canvases to bring up a gallery, and I'm copying the list of audience tags into a generic variable or a generic collection called tag list. But when you click this one, I'm copying the project phase tags into a generic variable, generic collection called tag list. But when you bring this up, it's the same canvas each time and the same gallery each time. Okay, and so I think that works, yeah, quite nicely. And then all I'm doing with this adjustment is I'm adjusting the Y position of some of these controls to be based on the relative position of the ones above. So for example, where would this fit? If you have a look at the Y position of this label, this control, it literally is saying, I am going to be, my Y position is the Y position of this control. You can see it highlighted. I've clicked here and it's come up. I call this audience tags. And I'm going to take the height property of the audience tag, which now Y position would be here. The height then drops it to here. And if I add another 5 pixels for good measure, that just pushes it down slightly. Okay. And just to show you, if I added, say, 15 pixels to it, keep an eye down there and you can see that it's still moved. Okay. That's just relative positioning, which also helps this solution to work really well. Okay. So let's do the final step, which is saving this thing. How do we actually get it to SharePoint? So now let's revisit the patch command that I mentioned at the very start of the video. This bit is actually pretty easy, and Patch is quite forgiving when it comes to managed metadata related stuff. So if you recall, we basically now have our two collections. We have audience tags and WBS tags holding our project phase info and our audience info, and the selected ones are there. So in actual fact, patching kind of works like this. Let me just bring this down. Now, patch is always an ugly looking command by virtue of the fact that you have to manually specify each field, the value of each field. And so let's go through this, because I'm actually using a technique that the documentation says shouldn't work, but it does anyway. First up, I'm patching. The first parameter for a patch is the data source. Okay, I'm patching my idea register, which is going back to my original SharePoint list here. And so firstly, the title field of this. Now the title field here, if you recall, in SharePoint I renamed title to idea, but it's still referring to title, but that's cool. So title's easy. We're saying, look, just give us the value of whatever is in the text box, right? That's title, no problem. Have a look at audience. Audience, if you recall, going back to SharePoint, audience is our managed metadata term. Now it turns out that you can literally just send it back the collection and it will happily accept it. So right now I am saying filter the audience tags collection and only send back the ones that are currently selected. Now here's the thing that's interesting. I actually have that extra column, if you recall, called selected. So we have a look at our collections, audience tags. There's my selected column. I'm sending this entire block of data back to PowerApps via the patch function, and PowerApps is cool with it. It just ignores columns that don't matter to it. So I'm able to say, right, just give me all of the selected audience tags. Similarly with the project phase, give me all of the selected work breakdown tags, and then learning type, get that from the variable. So if you recall, going back a little bit now, remember when I was clicking each of these type of ideas and the onSelect was updating a variable? Learning type, well, that learning type wasn't just used for the colors. I also use it in the patch command here so that I write that back to SharePoint as well. So to demonstrate this, if we take the one here, much more PowerApps UI awesomeness. Everyone will be interested in it. We click submit. Off it goes to SharePoint land. We go and do a refresh. Lo and behold, much more PowerApps UI awesomeness. Fantastic. One thing that I just realized I forgot to cover. So here is the last sort of final piece of the puzzle. I just want to go back into the tagging thing here. And specifically, I want to speak to this bit where I had this, when you click this on select, this update if, because I never explained this bit. What the heck is going on with this? Now, anyone who uses galleries will at least have some idea of what's going on here. So here is the basic gist. In a gallery row, for each row in a gallery, and the row relates to the data source that it's displaying, for each row in a gallery, there is a property called this item, right? That literally refers to the specific row we're dealing with, okay? So this item .term GUID is actually referring to this. If we go look in the collection and we go and have a look at tag list, remember this is managed metadata. We have a property called, or a column called term GUID. You can consider this a primary key. This is a unique GUID related to the term. And so what I'm basically saying is this. Go to the tag list, right? Go look at all of the tags and go and find the tag list where the term GUID equals the currently selected one. And for that row, change selected. So this is a way of narrowing down. We're literally saying update, please update the tag list. The state changes from selected to not selected and vice versa. That immediately refreshes the data set, which changes the display in the gallery. So hopefully I've done an okay description of that. Probably could be done with a diagram, but basically at the end of the day, that little piece there was all about selecting the specific term that had to have its selected property set from true to false or vice versa. So thanks for sticking with me. I appreciate we covered a lot of Power Apps concepts here to come up with this result. And we also then, there's a bit of SharePoint baggage there with managed metadata and all of that sort of stuff. Nevertheless, I'm really keen that even if you're a novice user and there are some bits that are not clear, please let me know in the comments. It helps me to make better presentations, and I'm using this pattern a lot more, and I'm happy to sort of expand on it and refine it further. Otherwise, until next time, thanks for watching.